Releasing Trauma is sponsored by the Global Association for Trauma Recovery. The Global Association for Trauma Recovery is a social impact organization serving as a resource for survivors and their families, dedicated to facilitating change by spreading trauma-related awareness and thus creating a more trauma-informed world. Learn more at gaftr.org. Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is Jonathon Seidl, and we're going to be talking about mental health and anxiety. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, I'm totally stoked to have this conversation. That's going to be great. Thank you definitely for joining me on the show today. Listeners, bear with me. My voice, I'm still recovering from my cold, which I'm sure you've heard in a couple of the other episodes. So bear with me. I will try and talk as loud as I can so you can hear me. But John, let's start out with having you tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So I kind of grew up knowing that there was something different about me. I grew up in Wisconsin, and there were just little things that would get stuck in my brain, things that I couldn't get out of my head. There was this constant feeling when I approached just any little thing of that would cause the normal person anxiety. I just approached it where it was just like times 10. And so there was a feeling of my stomach in my throat, like kind of that feeling where you're standing on the edge of a cliff or close to it, and you just kind of really get that anxious feeling. But that was really my reality. And I just thought, well, that's just kind of how it is and how I'm wired. And but as I started going through life, I tell people I don't know how I got through high school or college, especially because I went to college in New York City. So for an anxious person going to the pinnacle of an anxious place. And so I got married, and a few years into my marriage, my wife just kind of broke down, and she's like, listen, I can't live like this. And she said a term that I think a lot of people who have struggled with anxiety or OCD or mental health would recognize. She said, listen, I'm always walking on eggshells. I don't know what's going to put you into a thought cycle, or, what little thing you're going to just, obsess over. And the kind of impetus for me getting help was we were living in downtown Dallas at the time, and we went to this coffee shop. We were just going to walk around downtown, and she was going to get the coffee. I was going to run to the bathroom, and I said, hey, just remember, I don't like Splenda in my coffee. She's like, I got it. I just think like Splenda tastes like dirty sock water. And so I go to the bathroom, I come back, she hands me my coffee, I take a sip, and there's Splenda in it. And I'm just like, what? Like, what? Like, I told you not to have this, And so for people with OCD, it's the little things that you just can't stop thinking about. Right. And so the little things that don't make sense to everyone else. And so like, I just could not stop thinking about the wrong sweetener in my coffee, and it just ruined the day. We were supposed to have this awesome day walking around, and just the entire day, I couldn't get over the wrong sweetener in my coffee, And that's when she kind of finally broke down that night, or the morning after, was like, listen, you got to get help. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Like, when you see the woman you love just broken in front of you, and just like, you don't want her to live like that for the rest of her life as well.
Right.
So I did. I got help. I saw a psychiatrist, and I walk in there, and within minutes, it was a pretty easy diagnosis for him. He's like, you have GAD, generalized anxiety disorder with OCD. And for me, Tracy, it was actually one of the most freeing days of my life. Getting that diagnosis was so good, because I finally knew what I was fighting. I finally knew what was wrong with me. I could finally put a name to it. And so in my book, there's an entire chapter called Call It by Its Name. And the idea is that once we name something, like we finally like take power over it. That doesn't mean it goes away, right? But it does give us more power over it. And so I really equate it to the fact that before I got my diagnosis, I had a blindfold on, the lights were off, and I was just kind of swinging in the dark. But when I got my diagnosis, the blindfold was off, the lights were on, and I knew exactly what I was fighting and how to fight it. And so that's kind of the overview of my story. And so that was in 2014. I finally, told the world my secret, as I said, in about 2016. And that was really the reaction I got from writing that article, made me realize, wow, A, I'm not alone. And two, like there's a lot of misconceptions and shame, and especially in the Christian culture that I'm a part of, that exists. And so this, I really wanted to break down the stigma. And so that's kind of what led to the book.
There is such a, in and out of the Christian community, there is such a huge stigma around mental health and mental health issues. It's still one of those taboo subjects that you kind of skirt around, like, back in the day where they used to whisper the name of it, oh, she has cancer,
Yeah.
It's just one of those things nobody wants to talk about. And it's something that we have to talk about because it's very real. It's very prominent. And, in this day and age, it's, I think, so much more pronounced. I don't know if it's more pronounced or if it's just that we're finally starting to really recognize it and speak about it more. And so we hear about mental health and depression and anxiety and all of that a lot more now than we used to.
Yeah, but I think even just with the pandemic, though, it really has awakened it, right?
My goodness, yes.
I kind of equate it to, there was a few years ago where I was getting ready for this motorcycle trip. I was going to take, I live in Texas now, so I was going to take this motorcycle trip down to a national park. And what I didn't realize is you have to like train for this, and you basically have to train your butt to sit on a motorcycle for like 5-6 hours, So like me and my brother-in-law, we would take the weekends, and we would just like ride until our butts were about to fall off, and like every time we just try to ride longer. And so I was doing that, and I came home after a Saturday morning ride to my wife, and she goes, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Well, I just got this like rash or something on my back." And so she looks at it and she goes, "Oh, well, you got a heat rash. You're wearing like your motorcycle gear and that kind of thing." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay." And as the day progressed, it got really, really bad. And we were doing some volunteer work at our church. And so we went later that day, and my buddy's like, "Hey, you don't look so hot. Like, are you okay?" And I said, "Man, I got this rash." He goes, "Let me see." So I lift up my shirt and he looks at it. He goes, "Oh, bro, you have shingles." I'm like, "What?"
Oh,
he's like, "Yeah."
No.
He's like, "I've had it twice." He's like, "You need to go into the walk-in clinic, and if it's too late for the antiviral, you need to, get some pain meds." He's like, "That's awful." And I'm like, "Oh." So I go in and I talk to the doctor. She's like, right away. She's like, "Yep, you have shingles." And I said, "Well, isn't that like for old people?" And she said, "Well,
not really."
Well, but she said, "Here's what happens is like, if you've ever had the chicken pox, you have shingles in your body. Shingles is the chicken pox virus that just kind of goes dormant in your spine. And now as you get older, yes, your immune system breaks down and it's able to break through. Or in moments of, stress, high anxiety, which I was going through some stuff at work at the time, she said it kind of breaks through. And that's what I feel like has happened with people with anxiety and the pandemic, is like everyone kind of has this. Anxiety is just your fight or flight, right? It's your self-preservation. So everyone has that, right? You encounter a bear on the trail, you either fight the bear or run. I hope you run. But it's just that fight or flight. And so there's a lot of people who have had this, and then the pandemic kind of, like the shingles virus in my body, it just kind of wakens it up, and they're like, what do I do with this? They've never experienced before, and they feel lost.
I get it, because when I was, oh my goodness, mid to late 30s, I came down with chickenpox.
Oh, wow.
And, I called my doctor and I'm like, dude, I got chickenpox. He's like, you what? Nah. And I went in, the next day. The nurses didn't believe me because it hadn't really fully broken out yet. And then I went in a couple of days later and I was just head to toe, and they were like, oh my gosh. So yeah, it just kind of sits there, and who knows how long that chickenpox virus was dormant in my body.
Right.
And then it just kind of broke free and said, hello, I'm going to make an appearance today. Exactly. And that's exactly how it works with the mental health issues, mental illness. My depression, yes, I take medication for it and everything. Doesn't mean that I don't have depressive episodes. And, and you just never know when that's going to happen. And it just all of a sudden rears its head one day and says, hey, thought I'd stop by.
Yep, exactly. And that was, for me, it's like I struggled with anxiety and OCD, and I never struggled with depression until one day I struggled with depression.
Right.
And so I even talk about that in the book, just kind of, I think there's a lot of people, you talk about the stigma earlier that, they think, well, I haven't struggled with this. Why am I struggling with it now? Is there something wrong with me? I come from a faith background that was probably like, you have a lack of faith, or you need to pray more, you need to, repent of your sins and all that kind of stuff, which is just crap, and so they're left just lost in looking for help.
Right. I mean, you can pray only so much, but it's not necessarily going to make your anxiety go away. It's probably going to make it worse, because it doesn't make it go away. But so what are some of the things that you have found have really helped you to, manage your OCD and your anxiety?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's two chapters in my book that I put right back to back. And, again, because I approach this from a faith perspective, it's like there are physical ways that I address this, and there are spiritual ways that I address this. And I think what's unfortunate is that we live in a society today that you want to label something all one thing and all not the other, right? So I think there's just as much error in labeling this, this is just a spiritual problem that you need to pray away, and it's just a physical problem that you need to if you just exercise more, and I think you really need to have a holistic approach. So on the physical side, and I tell people like especially in the faith community that I talk to is listen, I can't address any, spiritual stuff until I address the physical. And it's like, the physical way that I handle this, it's like glasses, right? Like if I'm reading a book and I don't have my glasses on, it doesn't matter how hard I try, I'm not going to be able to read the book, Mm-hmm. And so the glasses, are the physical thing that allows me to read the book, right? Like, so what I tell people is, on the physical side, I take medication, right? And so I even just wrote an article recently explaining to people, like, stop trying. Like, I've had 4 conversations in the last month, and then especially since the book came out, just about people who are like, yeah, I've been really trying hard to get off my meds. And it's like, if you like, okay, but why is that always this like, holy grail goal? It's like, no, like if your meds help you, then let them help you, stop making an idol of trying to get off these meds, And exactly. Of course I got hate mail back, and, it's like, whatever, I'll deal with that. But so I take meds. I'm on Prozac. I've been on Prozac since 2014, and it's been wonderful, right? Mm-hmm. My wife says, like, there's before medication John and after medication John, and I really love after medication John. So I take my meds. I do exercise, right? I do try to get every day, even if that's just a 15-minute walk or if that's a 30-minute cardio session. And by the way, like, I hate working out. Like people, people are like, oh, well, that's really hard. And, I don't like it. Guess what? I don't like it either. I really don't. But I know, and then I can trace back to my mental health gets worse when I'm not making time to exercise.
True.
I've changed some of my eating habits, right? One of the big ones is, after studying and looking into what caffeine does, like I still drink my coffee in the morning. Don't get me wrong. But you know what? In the afternoons, I switched to like Fresca, I switched to seltzer water, because I know that impacts my anxiety levels. And then that leads me into the third thing is I also know it impacts my sleep. And we're just in this culture and in this day and age, we just do not put enough emphasis on sleep. There's an entire masterclass just on sleep, and the importance of sleep. And so those are some of the things I do in chorus that then allow me to say, you know what, I know I have like deeper rooted issues, right? I have trust issues. I have control issues. I want, like, my anxiety wants to control everything. I want to be able to try to control everything. As a person of faith, like, I'm not trusting that some of the things that God says are true or telling me are true. There's pride, right? There's this idea of like being really self-focused. And so in one of the parts of the book, I talk about how, and this is not even just from a Christian perspective, this is just from a studies perspective that says, hey, if you find yourself in depressive episode, an anxious episode, an OCD thought cycle, go out and serve. Because our mental health issues tend to be self-focused, right? We're thinking about what we're going through. We're thinking about what we're thinking, what we're feeling, how everything is affecting us. And so when you get out and serve, I don't care if that's a church or a soup kitchen or a race or your kids, library program, when you get out and serve, it takes the focus off yourself and you finally kind of open your eyes to, oh, wait, it's not just all about what I'm going through, and that's not to say that you're selfish for self-care, like nothing like that. That's not what I'm saying. So those are some of the kind of physical and then as well as the spiritual things that I kind of implemented to help with my anxiety and OCD.
Sure. Excuse me. Those are, definitely great ideas, great tips. And, as far as the medication goes, I fought medication for years. I would go on and off it because I didn't want to be on the medication. I wanted to be able to control my depression without it. And the fact of the matter is I can't. So I finally accepted, or had to accept really, that, the medication has to be part of my life. So, I take my Zoloft every day. I take my Adderall every day. And I can better focus. When I have the depressive episodes, I let the doctor know, and a lot of times he'll put me on the Abilify for a couple of weeks to kind of help bump up the effects of the Zoloft. And then, I come back down off of it, but you got to do what you got to do to survive through it and thrive through it, really. So there's nothing wrong with being on medication. But there's a stigma around it,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting is that goes beyond just the Christian community, right? There's this idea that like, oh, I need, I'm on a crutch and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And how I approach it with people is like, if, especially in the Christian community, I'm like, listen, like if you believe that God has his hand in so many things, like one of the things he had a hand in was allowing people to create medication. Right. And so like, I view it as actually a gift from my God to say, hey, here's something that can really help you, and then, I have had other people say like, well, what about the side effects? And I'm like, yes, there are side effects, but sure. One of the things that I go through painstaking hoops to jump through in the book is to say, listen, you as a sufferer want to be heard. You want people to listen to you. You want the stigma to go away. Just as much as you want to be heard, your loved ones deserve to be heard. And I can tell you that my wife is saying, John, you are a much better person on your medication than not. And so like one of the side effects of Prozac for me is like, I'm heavier than I was when I'm not on it. Like when I'm not on it, I can run for a few weeks, watch what I eat, and I'm losing 50 pounds, Right. It's not happening on this, but my wife says, John, I would rather have you a little more plump and be like someone I want to be around and a family person that we want to be around, than you be skinny and just like, off your meds and like we don't know, what's going to set you off. And it's like, my wife has a right to be heard and listened to, and she has to live with this as much as I have to live with this, right? And so if she says that, I need to honor and respect that. And I think we lose sight of like this disorder, whether it's anxiety, OCD, or bipolar or depression, it doesn't affect just us. It affects those around us. And so if they are saying, wow, your medication really helps you, I need to honor that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a very powerful thought right there, is that, we need to take into consideration those of us, those who are around us, those who love us and interact with us most often. How does our mental issues, affect them? And, like you said, your wife was always walking on eggshells. Well, so now you're causing her anxiety and trauma. Yep. Because she has to deal with your anxiety, so it's kind of a vicious circle there. So yeah, you absolutely have to be mindful of not just yourself, but everybody around you as well.
And I'm glad you brought that up. There was a time of, I think you used the word causing her trauma. There was a time where I finished the early manuscript of this book, and my wife read a copy, and like I could just tell like something was off. And so finally, like one night, she's like, "Hey, I need to go back to counseling." And I'm like, "Well, like what did I do something? Like what's wrong?" She goes, "No, it's not anything you did." She said, "But like in reading the book, it just brought up some painful memories and times that I'm realizing that I've never fully dealt with." She said, "Listen, am I glad that you are where you are right now? Yes. Are you so much better? Yes." She goes, "But in that time before you got help, like it was such a chaotic time in my life. And then when you got help, I just realized that I kind of suppressed a lot of dealing with that because I was so happy that you were better. I was so happy to have this version of you, John." He's like, "I just never dealt with it." And so one of my messages, to people that are listening is, if you're a family member, is like, don't be ashamed to go get counseling yourself, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And if you are someone who is the sufferer, like, don't be afraid to encourage your loved one. Like, hey, is there anything that like you or we need to work through? Like, let's do that. Let's dig into that mess.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think doing, like what you're doing, what I'm doing, talking about it, being open about it, and telling people about our stories, I think that's one of the only ways we're going to break down the stigma around, mental health, anxiety, and all of that.
Yes, absolutely. When you bring something out of the darkness and into the light, like it loses, like I said, it loses that power, right? And so it's not just naming it, but it's also like let's talk about it, And I tell people, like, I've gotten to the point where I have anxiety and OCD, and anxiety and OCD don't have me. That doesn't mean I don't struggle with them, right? It's an ongoing battle. We talk about chapter 8 of the book. It's an ongoing battle. But now I actually know what I'm fighting, and I'm winning the war.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah. So this was born out of, I was working in 2016 at a nonprofit called I Am Second, which does stories of just life transformation from celebrities to authors to everyone. And I was in charge of all of the writing for that organization. And so we were trying to do some writing projects that really mirrored the power of the film projects. And so I built this team of freelancers and staff that were writing about just really tough topics, whether it was trauma, whether it was abuse, like we were just letting it all out, And there's kind of this thought in the back of my head of like, hey, John, there's something you could talk about that you're holding back. And I was like, I'll talk about anything but that, and part of that goes to the stigma, I just didn't, honestly, my fear was I didn't want, especially employers, to at that point and then in the future be able to dismiss me and say, oh, John, that's just the anxiety. That's just the OCD talking. Like that idea that you're really passionate about, or that drum you keep beating, or that thing you keep telling us we need to change. That's just your OCD, And so I just put it off. And then finally it just like I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it. I lock the door of my office. I write it out. I don't even tell my wife I'm doing it. And I put it out there. And so that was in 2016, this article called It's Time to Tell the World My Secret. And I talked about medication. It's centered around the fact that I was a little tired that afternoon because I took my meds. I usually take them at night. I took it in the afternoon, and it makes me a little sleepy sometimes. And the response that I got to that article was just absolutely incredible, and it really outweighed any of the negative effects that I was worried about, and that I have, by the way, encountered. 2016 was 5 years ago. Like we're getting better, but especially then, like there was still some negative pushback. I did get those responses I have gotten those responses from bosses and coworkers. Yeah. Are like, are you sure that's not just the OCD? And then I just need to really count to 10 and have a rational conversation. But that, when I saw that response, that was the impetus for, okay, this is going to be a book. And it still took me a little bit, right? There's still things that I needed to work through and get through because I was still a baby in understanding my disorder, right? Sure. I mean, two years into it, you're still like really trying to figure out, I don't even know what mindfulness was at that time, like all these things that I talk about in the book. And so the book is really a guide for people, and it is geared towards people of faith, but it's not just for them, right? I think if you're not a person of faith, you can still glean a lot of helpful truths. I do get practical as much as I can, especially in those chapters about the physical battle. And so it's really just a guide to removing the stigma, to how I've gotten through it and what you can do as well. And then there's especially a chapter for those loved ones, right? When my wife comes to me and says I had to go to counseling, that really birthed a whole chapter of help for loved ones of people who suffer.
Awesome. And it's called Finding Rest.
It's called, Finding Rest, a survivor's guide to navigating the valleys of anxiety, faith, and life. And so you can get it, as they say, you can get it wherever books are sold. Right. You can get it at Barnes and Noble. You can get it online at Walmart or Target online. Or you can go to my website, findrestnow.com. And that'll be like kind of a landing page that tells you where you can get it, reviews, stuff like that. So that one's findrestnow.com.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today, sharing a little bit about your story and, your struggles and how you've worked to overcome them. I really appreciate it.
Tracy, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for all the great work that you are doing to help us erase that stigma.
Absolutely. Thank you. Listeners, I will have all of John's contact information, a link to his book, everything down in the show notes. Just head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com. If you're listening from one of our partner stations, pull up John's episode and all his contact information will be there. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you in the next show.